Circular or spheroid-shaped lights, otherwise known as orbs, are a common feature in many varied paranormal reports. They have been seen and photographed in the presence of UFOs, cryptids, hauntings, and any other paranormal phenomena that you care to mention. But what are they? Often the observers perceive the orbs as having intelligence or of being under intelligent control, as they easily maneuver around obstacles as though they are fully aware of the environment. They also often seem to be fully aware of the people observing them as well. For the most part, these orbs act as a distant, non-threat, as reported in the following account. I was heading to Mechanicsburg around 9:15 p.m. I just got off the I-76 when we came around a bend and saw 4 glowing orbs in the sky. With my friend in the car, we pulled over to the side of the road to watch the light show. A 5th orb came into view from our right, as the others seemed to go off into the distance. Other people were pulled over on the side of the road as well. Don't be fooled by the triangle arrangement of these lights. I know it looks like the famous flying triangle, but I assure you, the orbs were independent of each other. The photograph provided here isn't all that impressive, but it does prove that there was actually something in the sky, and so adds weight to his report. This type of orb, as seen in this video taken over Lafayette in 2011, is very commonly reported all over the world, and is unfortunately very prone to misidentification, especially in today's modern skies filled with aeroplanes and drones. Lights in the sky may be the most common type of orb report. However, on occasion, they have also been seen at close quarters near to the ground, as if they are performing a type of reconnaissance of the area. This seems to be the case in the following story. I'm unsure of exactly what it was I saw that night, and most may classify it as an orb. But what is an orb anyway? One late summer night, I think this was back in 2001, my friend was staying the night at my house and we went out for a walk. He was 14 and I was 16. At the time, I lived on the family farm in rural southern Maryland. There was a large, relatively circular path that circumscribed the westernmost parcel of land that connected the 4 homes on the property. Most of the path was laden with large gravel rocks, but the northern quadrant of this path was an old paved driveway that ran from my mobile home past the barn to the rural country road that marked the western edge of the farm. The path from my home to the road was about 500 feet. Back then, I'd usually walk our beagles around the farm at night at my mother's request, so I had no fears of wandering around at night. When my friend came over, it was fun to break up our Red Faction kill streaks with strolls around the farm. It was very dark out in the country, and with all of the open space, the night sky was a canopy of stars. Couple that with the warm summer air, and nighttime excursions were irresistible. We headed out. My terrier, Mitzi, followed along with us. She was always at my heels and didn't need a leash like the beagles did. My friend and I started walking along the paved driveway and had intended to complete the circular path in a counterclockwise direction. We made it nearly to the road, just passing my great-uncle's house on our right. He owned the farm, with my great-aunt's house to our left. The path shot off to the left along my aunt's dirt driveway and would have connected to the gravel path further along, but something caught my eye. Another one of my great aunts lived across the country road, directly adjacent from my uncle's house, but her house wasn't on farm property, though there was an open field on her side of the road. Behind her house was a wall of trees and the deep woods beyond. The woods were everywhere out there, but my farm was mostly open land. Now back to something caught my eye. What I saw was a light coming out of the woods from behind my aunt's house. The road was quiet. Everything was quiet. I watched this light come closer, and I don't know why the first thing I thought it could be was a white rabbit, but I was trying to make sense of something that was about to get stranger. As the light crossed the road and approached closer, I could see that it was a floating ball of light, about the size of a basketball, floating about 3 feet off the ground. I'm not sure when I nudged my friend to get his attention, but we were both watching as the light avoided and maneuvered around the few tall pine trees my uncle had in his front yard. One thing I noticed about the light was that it was bright and white, but it didn't seem to cast any light on its surroundings. I don't remember if one of us moved or said something, but the light noticed us and stopped. It sat still for a few seconds, and so did we. We just watched it, and we were about 30 feet from it. Eventually my dog noticed it too, as she was sniffing around somewhere else up until then. She spotted it and started yapping and ran right at it. At that point, the sphere of light sped off, very fast, back in the direction it had come from, right back into the woods, with my dog trailing behind. Mitzi was a fast dog, but she couldn't keep up. We watched her follow it into the woods, though. My friend and I just looked at each other, probably said a few expletives, and then ran back to my house and into my room. My dog had lost her quarry, as she was back on our heels by the time we reached my yard. The experience was more bewildering than scary, but the adrenaline rush of seeing something like that had us wired, and I kinda wanted to be scared. So we were just staring out my window, which faced at the end of the driveway, for the rest of the night. I'm still not sure what it was, but that ball of light exhibited an intelligence, an active awareness of its surroundings, and perhaps fear, which prompted it to flee. These scout-like orbs are not always as timid as the last story may suggest. The famous Skinwalker Ranch was host to a very different type of orb. The orbs in this location were aggressive and maybe even deadly. Tom and Ellen Gorman stood outside their homestead looking west. It was evening. The summer was coming, and the chill of the winter air was no longer apparent. Both were stressed. They watched their cattle grazing several hundred yards away on the lush pasture, and just to the south, 3 of their horses munched on the grass. Tom could tell there was something wrong. The cattle and the horses were restless. Tom was the first to see it, as he was quick to notice anything slightly out of place. He stiffened. A blue orb was flying in the tree line next to his horses. He felt Ellen beside him, tensing as she saw too. The intense blue light cast by the object was easily visible as it flew through the trees. They both watched as it emerged from the tree line and slowly flew around the head of one of the horses. The horse noticed it too, and impatiently shook its head, as if trying to rid itself of a swarm of flies. The darting orb was close enough to illuminate the animal in an eerie bright blue glow. Tom was puzzled by the fact that the horse never registered alarm. Normally the blue orbs caused extreme stress in animals. Suddenly, the blue object darted away from the horses and with astonishing speed moved closer to the Gormans. It stopped abruptly in mid-air about 15 feet above the ground and hovered silently about 20 feet from them. This was easily the best view they had ever had of the elusive blue orbs. They watched, fascinated, as the object hung in the air, apparently defying the laws of gravity. The exterior of the orb was a clear, hard shell, not unlike glass. It was maybe 2 or 3 times the size of a baseball, and inside the glass-like exterior moved a swirling, intensely blue substance. It seemed to Tom like a liquid beginning to boil, a nearly bubbling incandescent blue fluid. He could hear a faint crackling sound from the object, like static electricity sometimes makes. As Tom watched this amazing spectacle, the hair on the back of his neck rose. He could feel a wave of deep, naked fear washing over him. He felt paralyzed with the deepest, most visceral fear he had ever known. It was overwhelming. Wild animals had trapped Tom, and he had been close to death, but he had never felt anything like the intensity of the terror that he felt now. He knew Ellen was feeling the same because she had begun to hyperventilate. She gasped deeply, and her body had begun to shake. Tom felt like he was going to have a seizure. Suddenly, Ellen, who was whimpering with terror, turned on her flashlight. The effect was instantaneous. The blue orb darted abruptly into the branches of the nearby tree, as if trying to avoid the flashlight's beam. It maneuvered effortlessly through the branches at high speed. It was obvious to them that the orb was under intelligent control. Then, as abruptly as the object had darted into the trees, it suddenly shot out of sight behind their homestead. Tom knew that the fear he had felt was artificial. On one April evening in 1996, Tom sat outside, looking west and trying to relax. The beauty of this property was undeniable, yet the family was feeling overwhelmed by the stress caused by the strange phenomena. His 3 dogs sat contentedly beside him. Tom was grateful for such loyal dogs. All 3 were healers. They were gentle with the family, but absolutely ruthless with strangers. They were also aggressive cattle dogs. The cattle knew when to obey these animals, and he could rely on them to defend his valuable, artificially inseminated breeders against the numerous coyotes, raccoons, and wild dogs that moved through his property. All in all, he was feeling almost content. It had become a regular occurrence now to see a large orange something hovering slightly above the cottonwood trees about a mile west of where he sat. It did not particularly concern him, as he had seen these large orange things dozens of times before. Gorman had spent hours looking at them over time, through the rifle scope that he carried with him to enhance his already superb eyesight. Very occasionally, Gorman had seen objects flying out of these orange things, as if they were windows into another dimension. He had little understanding of the physics involved. All he knew was that he wished they would go away. Then he spotted an object in the distance at the far end of the pasture. The sight gave him a chill. A small flash of intense blue. Tom straightened in his chair, all pretense at relaxation gone. The dogs also took notice and began their low-pitched growls. He saw it again, and it was only 300 yards away, moving swiftly along the bottom of his pasture in a north-south direction. It was less than 10 feet off the ground. When it got to the southern end of his pasture, it abruptly turned and began flying in Tom's direction. He tensed. He could see it much more clearly now. A perfectly round, intense blue orb, bigger than a baseball and capable of very sophisticated, intelligent maneuvers. He had seen them so many times on his property before, and they usually signaled trouble. His dogs were barking. The object was now less than 100 yards away, and it had changed directions again. It was moving north, parallel to Tom's position. Without really thinking, he set his dogs loose. Usually he kept them beside him when these things were flying around, but tonight he lost his patience. His 3 dogs took off at top speed in the direction of the blue orb. It didn't seem to react to their presence until the animals got much nearer. Then it dipped down and descended until it was only a few feet off the ground. The 3 dogs began leaping at the object. They were snarling with jaws snapping. Each time the animals leaped at the orb, it skillfully moved out of the way, the jaws missing sometimes only by inches. This strange ritual began to play itself out. It was apparent that the dogs were becoming incensed with this strange object that danced out of the way at the last moment, but then dipped down again so they could lunge at it again. The intense blue orb seemed to be deliberately teasing the enraged dogs. Tom was getting increasingly uneasy as the game of catch moved in the direction of a thick copse of trees, a couple of 100 yards to his south. He sensed that the orbs seemed to be steering the dogs toward the cover. A couple of minutes later, the orb dipped down to the ground and with almost languorous speed flew slowly among the trees. The snarling, eager dogs gave chase. Suddenly, Gorman heard sounds that chilled him to the bone. The unmistakable, fear-filled yelps of dogs in mortal agony. Then an eerie silence. Nothing moved. Tom waited for his animals to return. After a couple of hours, he went to the homestead with a heavy heart. He decided not to look for them until morning. His worst fears were realized when he went down the following morning to inspect the copse of trees. A smell of burned flesh greeted his nostrils as he dipped his head beneath the low branches. 10 yards inside was a small clearing. Tears filled Tom's eyes. 3 large circles of brown, dried-out grass were in the middle of the clearing. At the center of each circle was a blackish, greasy mess. The stink of his incinerated dogs was awful. Tom rushed out of the copse, his mouth dry and his stomach heaving. And so, as we explore this phenomenon further, it becomes clear that at least some of these sightings and experiences seem to be of independently thinking and aware intelligences who have, or choose to take, the form of incandescent orbs. The skull experiments were a well-documented and amazing example of spirit communication, in which many examples of physical manifestations of a spiritual nature were witnessed. Common among the manifestations was that of orbs. The experimenters were able to capture on film glimpses from another world, apparently a spiritual world, and among these photographs of the other side were many pictures of orbs which displayed faces within the spheres. It was as though the orbs acted as a strange portal through which information could be passed between the worlds. In my opinion, these portals were not windows as we think of them. They were spheroidal in nature. Sort of like a bubble in reality, reflecting imagery from another dimension. But when I think of experiences like those at Skinwalker Ranch, I wonder if more than just information can be exchanged through these bubbles. Perhaps energies, both physical and psychic, can also be transmitted through these bubbles, these orbs. Energies that can kill.